So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get us going in our learning lab. So I don't, just a reminder, because I feel like it's been, each month it feels like it's been a little bit of time since we meet. Our series right now is the learning lab. And oops, there we go. It's left. And the learning lab idea is that we have so much to learn from each other, and from others too, right? Every once in a while we bring in an outside expert. But today is one of those great days where we get to learn from each other, from what the um, other projects are doing. Let me fix my display settings. We were just talking about this. There you go. So that was, we did our oddest jobs. So to get things going before we have the real speakers, we have a new feature for our directors webinars, and it's called the Research Minute. And of course, we have research in the SIG Network newsletter that comes out every month, but I want to pull one thing out that, typically going to be a topic I've heard people ask questions about. They're not sure. I come across something, and I think this would be good for us to think a little bit about. We're going to talk about the book club, which is getting off and running and very exciting. I didn't bring my book with me today, which is too bad because that would have been a good prop. Communities of practice. They are also up and running, and I just want to make sure people are aware of them. And then I'm going to talk about the opportunity for orientation for new evaluators and new project personnel as another way of, we have mentors and mentees, and then this is yet another way to make sure people have the information they need, kind of get their footing as they come into SIG Network. And I'm going to share the SPDIG National Meeting survey results with you. All right, the research minute and the question. So learning collaboratives, this is from a study by Kay and colleagues, you can see in 2022 in Psychology in the Schools. It's called Using Professional Development Workshops to Support School Professionals' Capacities to Promote Students' Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Health, which is a mouthful, but it's about how learning communities can work well together. And they call them learning collaboratives, which that's the first time I've heard that one, but that works. They represent an approach that builds upon these best practices. So I want you to take in the best practices. I'll pick out the important parts in bold. And then I want you to tell me what's missing here. What do you think are critical features or characteristics of a learning collaborative that works well together? So the first is team-based learning. And so in this case, they're talking about people from different places coming together to learn collaboratively. You could see it in a school setting. It might be general education teacher, special education teacher, etc. I say that because every time I go to Learning Forward, I hear from special ed teachers they're not part of the learning communities in their schools. A series of in-person learning sessions for all teams supported by action periods between sessions in which teams work toward identified goals. So I think action periods, so you're learning, you got your focus area, you got your goal set, and then you go take action, and then you come back and you bring back data. Consultation from experts in the best practices you're taking a look at, focusing on measurement to track change. How do we know, right? And then sustainability of the efforts beyond LC participation. Sustainability being, okay, we've tried these new practices, we've seen they work. How do we know we'll be able to support them in the long run? So we've got five, I'd say 5+ because goal setting's in there as well. So what do you think is missing from what makes learning collaborative successful? Evidence-based practices, how to scale. Good, good, good. Oh, and that was a job. Identifying goals. Okay, goals is in there. Identify a goal, but it's like, it doesn't say to do it. It just says you have identified goals. So I can see why that, I think that was missing. Clear purpose or outcome. Great. So starting with like, so what do we need to, we're looking at data, we're seeing what the needs are. What are we going to focus on? Because I think most of us, pointing the fingers right back at me, we want to focus on everything, which is not a focus, right? My husband always says you can't have 1,000 favorites, and that's kind of what it's like to be able to want to focus on everything. So clear purpose. Coaching, good. And I think that having the outside experts come is one thing, but it's not the same as coaching. I agree, Laura. Structured formats for running the community of practice, very good. A protocol, right? Like this is the form. And I just, as I kind of intimated before, I went to Learning Forward recently and I went to a session about this. So I'm going to get to share lots of resources with you. I'm kind of gathering them all and I'll be ready next time we meet in the research moment. A fidelity check. So if we're trying out a new practice, how do we know that's being used? That should be part of the data. Good. Student voice, excellent. What do we know about the students and what this does for them? Okay, great. Intentionally archiving and managing the learning so it can be drawn upon in the future, right? So how do we become a learning organization? It's not just information for us, it's information for those who come after us or are in different groups. And then community voice, time structure and continuous improvement cycles. Good. That was another thing in my session was a plan, do, study, act aspect of it. Conflict resolution, conflict management. Good. I listened to a good podcast episode about coaching, but she was talking about when she ends up leading teams, because no one from them is actually doing the leading, so she'll come, this coach, and lead the teams, that they have lots of times like, okay, so these are, what are they called? The agreements that you come up with, the norms, there's another word I'm looking for, but you have the norms, but just because you have norms doesn't mean you're actually using them. And when conflict comes into play, that's when it might be really useful. And it's maybe when you're least likely to use them. Great. Good. These are fantastic. So there's our research. And here's our book club. So folks chose Making Numbers Count, which is Chip Heath and Darla Star. Am I getting her name right? Carla Star. Carla Star. Like I said, I forgot to bring my book today. Anyways, you have these slides on Sig Network, and there is a link to Making Numbers Count. You can also just look it up. I like to link to bookshop.org so that Amazon doesn't make all the book money, but you can buy it wherever you want. And not too expensive, really fun read. Even if you don't want to meet with us, you can still get it. But the big idea behind it is when we share data, when we share numbers, good to really think about what makes them meaningful to people, right? And I just heard an example of it yesterday. It was talking about the Arctic refuge. I'm probably missing a word there. And at first it said how many square feet it was or how many square miles it was. And it's like, okay, that sounds big. And then the author said roughly 2 times or roughly 2 Switzerlands would fit inside of it. And you go, oh, got it. 2 Switzerland sizes. I can pretty much picture that. So that's the idea behind Making Numbers Count. Our first meeting is January 22nd. This is a meeting where you don't have to be at every one if you can't be. So just know that the expectations are people will come when they can, but a good book club comes more regularly if you're really getting into good conversation. And it is the fourth Monday of each month at 3 o'clock Eastern. If you want to learn a little bit more about it without reading the book or alongside the book, the Stanford Business School, which is where Chip Heath is, has Chip talking on how to communicate data effectively. There's also an introduction, and then there's another podcast here too. So lots of ways to learn about the book, and I'm sure there are more. Oops. All right, work groups. So I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that work groups are up and running. They have been up and running, but we have new folks who have joined because in a survey that we sent out to you, I think it was it was the registration survey for the SPDIG National Meeting. You told us which ones you're interested in, and then I talked about last time about the expectations of membership. So we just want to make sure you're aware of the topics in case you missed any of that and still want to join. So Kelsey put a nice menu of them together. And what we did was when we created this, we took what was currently available. Some groups have vision and mission, are a little bit more planned in that way, and others are a little bit looser. And you'll see that in the descriptions. You can always email Kelsey with questions and she can forward them on to me if I can help with them. So states with small populations, they meet every other month. Regular attendance is not required, and it's just hot topics, resources, like what's going on with you. Here's a resource that might help, and that's led by Sarah Allen, a NOSEP project officer. The SPDIG Family Partners, that is led by Kelly Henderson, and she is at a Community Parent Resource Center, which is for some reason always very hard for me to say. A CPRC, which is OSEP funded in out of Virginia. And this is an opportunity for those centers and other groups that are partnering with SPDIGs to talk about how they can best do that work. We are also looking at maybe having it expand for others. And so if you have ideas for this group, we are open to that. The MTSS Community of Practice has been an opportunity just to bring in topics that have to do with MTSS. It's a little bit more loose than everything the other groups that we're looking at, but it's just coming together, learning, sharing. It's not really a community of practice as the definition, but we have called it that for a while. The Fidelity work group just got refreshed and did some thinking about what they want to focus on, what they want to accomplish together. So we have some great topics coming up. Jason Altman facilitated when the group met on Monday. And so it's a really like strong group and has helped to guide our work at the OSEP conference and also at the SPDIG national meeting around fidelity and in between, including children with the most significant needs. You can see they have a vision, they have objectives, they meet every 2 months. Regular attendance is required, so at least 80%, because it's something that folks want to build on together and not, kind of have to back up each time is the idea. You can, if I think Kelsey, did you add this to the chat by chance, the document, so people
Yes,
can?
yeah, the files in the chat.
Yeah, great. Social emotional learning, you can see we're talking about what the model, what CEL is, what does CEL practice look like at the SEA? How can it be supported at the SEA? What are evidence-based practices every 2 months? The Native American Working Group has been meeting for, I think, 3 years now, and strong mighty yet small group, but it just expanded a bit. And so we're excited about that. We created a TA template. So these are things that if a state wants to ensure that they're taking into consideration Native students, Native families, Native communities, and going about things in a way that's respectful and culturally humble. These are some practices, some resources. And so we put that together and we have a blog that will come out as soon as we can figure out shorthand. And then we have communication. And this work group has gone through the Made to Stick book and the success model and pulled it out and looked at the SPDIG project and how they can improve, how folks can improve their communication, thinking about the principles and working together and learning together. So any questions about the communities of practice?
I apologize if I missed it, Dr. Coffey, but there's so many groups there, and there's a couple I'd like. And
Sure.
do we just email Kelsey to get on a certain group list?
Yep,
Okay,
absolutely. Just say which group you're interested in, and then we can share the materials with you so you can get up to speed if anything has been decided in the groups already. So
thank
I,
you.
I should say too, these were the ongoing groups. We also have an early childhood work group that is starting up. So if anyone's interested in early childhood in the SPDIG, and am I forgetting one, Kelsey? Did we just start another one?
Um, I think just early childhood is the one I can think of that we have upcoming.
Okay.
Oh, family partners. Did we get that one?
Yeah, I said family
Okay.
partners and the fact that we might expand and change that. Yeah, but good thinking. Okay, where am I? Sorry. We were talking about two screens before with the presenters. Am I sharing my screen again? No, I'm not. Okay, I got it. Maybe. We'll see. So he's got that. There we go. Thank you for being patient. My computer is moving slowly. Okay. So orientation for new SIG Network members, it has been fantastic how many of you have raised your hand to be mentors. And it's also been fantastic how many people have raised your hand to say, hey, I could use some help with a mentor. It is so nice. And we get all kinds of people, evaluators, partners, project partners, um, project directors. It is wonderful to see. And the need has come to our attention that it would be nice to have an orientation that so the mentors don't have to do all the work, that we can get everyone in the same place. And so we want to have an orientation for project personnel and an orientation for evaluators because the job is so different, right? And so please add your email right now to the chat and Kelsey will grab it, or you can email her at signetwork@uoregon.edu, and then we'll use a meeting planner to find the best time and get your questions from you, make sure we answer those. All right, so the SPDIG National Meeting Evaluation. We are so grateful that you give us this information. And what we have done with it so far is we met with the planning committee and went over all the data and came up with recommendations, very specific recommendations for next year. So just so you know, we're already using this information, but I wanted to share it with you as well because you all plan conferences. You plan events, and it's also nice to know what came out of it. So I'm going to show you the basic idea, and then we can get a little bit if we have, I don't think we're going to have the minutes to get into the qualitative, but I can tell you some highlights. So one thing to know is that this year I completely forgot to put the QR code on the slides at the end of the conference. We might have even done a little bit earlier in case people had to get to the airport for people to get into the post-event survey. That is my fault. So we did not have the numbers we had last year respond to it. This year we had 43 people respond. Last year we had 62. So this is out of 43 people. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this, and then I'll share a Word document that shows you a little bit more. So overall, the 2023 SPDIG National Meeting met my needs, and you can see the majority said strongly agree, and then a few people said agree. I would recommend that other SPDIG personnel attend this meeting, mainly strongly agree. My knowledge related to using data increased, so we have more agree, some strongly agree. I learned about new tools I can use for my SPDIG work. I can see that a little bit, like 24 and then 11, I believe. I had sufficient opportunity to learn about other SPDIG's work. So this looks good with the strongly agree. I'll be able to use the ideas gathered from other projects. Again, that looks good. And lots of learning from each other, which folks always say is their favorite part. Facilitated networking looks great. Katie Novak. This is the very satisfied, somewhat satisfied. The cross-state meetings, which have been hard for us to nail, but I think we're getting there. Fidelity conversations, the poster sessions, which we hadn't done in years. Keynote, Jennifer Pierce. And then there's data conversations. And then, we'll get into that. So real quick, I think I have 1 minute to talk a little bit about qualitative. Actually, you know what? We have 1 minute to share the poll. So I'll say qualitatively, people overall really liked it, but there were definitely some suggestions for how we can do it better. And we felt like this was a learning year in a new environment, trying out some new things. And so we got some great ideas of how we can really tighten it up and make it a good experience for everyone. But the one piece of information you haven't given us specific feedback about yet is whether or not you'd like to go back to the capital turnaround, because we need to make that decision fairly soon. So can folks, and Kelsey, there you go. Do we stay at capital turnaround for next year, or do we try another place? So do we stay at capital turnaround? Yes, no, not sure. Not sure, obviously, if you weren't there or if you just need some thinking time and you're not sure. Either way, it works. I see some yeses in the chat. All right. All right. So we have 56% yes, 19% no, and 25% not sure. Okay. Interesting. I mean, it's interesting to have like no's makes me want to think about this some more, right? But thank you so much for the data. And with that, thank you for letting me go through the data the fast way. I was really happy with how things went. I thought our planning committee did a fantastic job. I think everyone can agree with that. And I think we learned a lot and we'll continue to make it better next year. So with that, I want to introduce our Georgia team. We have had the Georgia SPDIG present to us many times, different folks from the Georgia SPDIG. We've heard about their communication, their MTSS, their coaching. And today we're going to talk about a little something different, and that's their CEDAR work and their work with other universities. And so Karen Sudeth, the Georgia project director, is here for this PDIG, and she also brought some friends with her from CEDAR. She brought Amy Culpo and the Kennesaw State University, Melissa Driver, and that's it, right? I didn't forget anyone. So I'm going to turn it. Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to you all.
Great, thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you for having us. I'm going to share my screen here. So we are excited to be here today to talk to you about the collaboration that we've had between the State Personnel Development Grant team in Georgia with the CEDAR collaboration. So my name is Amy Culpo. I am newly with the Council for Exceptional Children. I was at AIR. I am the Director of Professional Solutions, and I have been fortunate enough to work on the CEDAR team with Georgia for quite a few years now. Melissa, I'll have you introduce yourself.
Oh, and Amy Howard, do you want to use the 4-H's, the 2 truths and a dream, or the bucket list?
Oh, sure. I will talk about the bucket list. I guess it's not really a bucket list, but something I am actively aiming to do is just travel to as many countries as I can. I love to travel. I haven't done a lot recently. And I say I haven't done a lot recently. I've been to, I think, like 5 or 6 new countries this year. I haven't done a lot in the past 2 months since I started a new job, but I love to travel and I just want to get to experience as many places as I can. So not technically a bucket list item, but kind of.
Yeah. Excellent.
I was going to say,
Welcome.
don't let Amy fool you. Every time I talk to her, I think she's like in Portugal or somewhere amazing. So, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Melissa Driver. I am an associate dean at Kennesaw University in our Bagwell College of Education. And my bucket list, kind of similar to Amy's, I would really like to take my family and go live abroad somewhere, like for an extended amount of time, more than a month. I don't know how to do that in my current job or really in any job, and they're all school age, but I would love to be able to figure out how to do that with them while they're still little. Now, Karen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm Karen Sudeth. I'm the project director for Georgia SPDIG. I'm also with the Georgia Department of Education as a grants program manager. I'm going to do the 4 H's. And I would say for history, my father's influence really led me to be the type of person that wants to continue to learn and achieve. My hero is absolutely, without a doubt, my husband of 42 years, Mike, and I can always depend on him to come through. My heartbreak is I have 2 little poodles. One of them is named Louie, and he's been very sick lately, so that kind of breaks my heart. I hope he gets better soon. And then my hope, and this is really an important hope. I have a daughter who just turned 42, and she changed careers. And you know how the generation or that generation, they do change careers, whereas my generation, you kind of picked a career and stayed with it. And she told me one day, Mom, I'm resigning my job because I want to do something that makes a difference, and I'm becoming a teacher like you. So that's my hope, that she achieves her dream.
Yes.
And she is in a classroom. This is her first year teaching. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. All right, we're going to do a quick SPDIG pulse check. I'd like for you to look at these 4 holiday titles and choose the one that best aligns with implementation of your SPDIG work. And if you will, enter the number of the film in the chat. So number 1, Frosty the Snowman. And you see our image there. He's struggling a bit. Home Alone, still struggling, but maybe figuring it out a little bit, but not a lot of people around him to help. Miracle on 34th Street, or It's a Wonderful Life. I see a lot of 3s coming up in the chat. Is that what you're seeing, Kelsey, Amy, Melissa? All right. Well, I think that's great. I want to say that at some point in time, if you're with SPDIG long enough, you will experience each one of these. It is not unusual to begin Frosty the Snowman. I'll tell you, I came back after medical leave in January. The season was cold and everything had gotten cold for me. So I was Frosty the Snowman in January of 23. And then at times you do feel home alone. You're trying to figure it out. And then by some miracle, you begin to put it all together and make sense of it. And when you are getting there, it becomes a wonderful life. And so I'm so happy to see that a lot of people are 3s and 4s. If you're a 1 or 2, there's no shame in that. It's a natural progression. Next slide, please. All right, and this is a heavy slide, lots of text, and I'm going to boil it down for you. It's really kind of scary when you consider that these are the 3 SPDIG goals for Georgia. But when you look at the first goal, that is about sustaining the work that we've implemented with SPDIG for the multi-tiered system of supports, to continue supporting those activities, and also to work with our institutes of higher education and our education preparation program efforts, which of course now is even more important to me now that my daughter's becoming a teacher and I'm getting some real feedback. And then also effective parent and stakeholder engagement is always essential to any work that we do. So our outcome measure is to improve reading outcomes of all students. And that's really, we've tagged it adolescent literacy. And that's for grades 4 through 8. And Georgia recently approved through the legislature House Bill 538, which is literacy K-3. So we didn't want to compete with that work that's being put in place. So we decided adolescent literacy 4 through 8 is going to be our bag. And our state literacy director is really appreciating that right now because it allows her to focus on the K-3 even more. And we do that by looking at the practices that are in classrooms around reading instruction and then bringing in those MTSS essential components and aligning that work. We believe that people will get more bang for their buck, so to speak, by doing that. And then finally, but not least of all, to increase the retention of induction teachers. So we do that through training and coaching on MTSS and instructional practices and really looking at those HLPs that come out of CEDAR. And, you know, now that people like my daughter have actually made that move or have dedicated themselves to a career in education, we want to provide the support and retain them in the field of education, especially our teachers of students with disabilities. Next slide, please. So I'm going to extract right here from that big, heavy slide what we're talking about today, which is to support and sustain SPDIG activities through strong collaboration at the GADOE, which is the Georgia Department of Ed, and you know, all of the other units. Everybody's doing work at the DOE, but we've got to make sure that we're collaborating internally, and we need to collaborate with our IHE EPP efforts as well, and the parent and stakeholder engagement, as I mentioned earlier. So one of our objectives is to increase the infusion and alignment of MTSS practices and resources into IHE EPPs. So what does that look like? Where do we go from here? And that generates some questions. How do we intend to do that? And how will we measure it or collect data to inform our work? So next slide, please. So one thing is our collaboration with CEDAR. And through CEDAR, we're able to make other connections with other IHEs and look through the lens of EPP and what's happening across our state. And so one of our goals is, or measures, is really to be able to report an increase of knowledge of MTSS and evidence-based literacy practices. And we need the pipeline of teachers to come in with some basic knowledge about MTSS so they don't feel like it's one more thing. And all of us here really know that MTSS with Fidelity is more efficient and effective. So instructionally, they can do more with their students. And through our collaboration with Georgia CEDAR IHEs, we hope that we will see integration about MTSS in the syllabi or the field experiences, because that's where it really takes on a life of its own with our young teachers. Next slide, please. And can I get you to go back one, Amy? I left off something important that I think I need to say. There are ways that we will collect this data. There's surveys, evaluations, how engaged are students in their studies, the samples of syllabi and field experiences. And then we also in Georgia have Go MTSS, SST, and we bang the drum about that a lot. So if you haven't heard about it, let us know. We'll be glad to tell you more. But as I said, new teachers have to have more knowledge about MTSS when they come into their new schools. And we know we can impact student and school achievement as well as reduce teacher burnout by having a cascading plan for this. And we can accomplish this with strong collaboration, partnerships with CEDAR and the IHEs. So now, Amy.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. So Karen talked about, obviously, the SPDIG. After I speak with you, you'll hear from Melissa about how we've really leveraged the CEDAR and SPDIG efforts. But first, I just want to provide some background about CEDAR in general and some of the things we've done related to MTSS and HLPs. So I am just curious, because I don't typically, I'm not in front of the SPDIG audience here. I'm just curious your familiarity with CEDAR before I get started. So if you could just put a 1, 2, or 3 in the chat to let me know how familiar you are with CEDAR. So 1, you've never heard of it. 2, you've heard of it and maybe you've used some of the universal resources online. And 3, you have either been part of a state CEDAR team or you are currently part of a state CEDAR team. And there's no wrong answers. All right, I'm seeing a little bit of everything, which is great. 2.5, I like that. All right, some 2s, 3s, 1.5, some 1s. Rhode Island is currently a CEDAR state. Yep, I think I've seen a few CEDAR states on here. Great. Well, I'm going to give you some background. For some of you, you may already know all this information, but for those of you who did put a 1 or maybe a 2, you'll learn something new today. So CEDAR is a National Technical Assistance Center. We are funded by OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs. We are, I believe, in our 11th or 12th year. You'll see us on a few slides. It's called CEDAR 3.0. That's our 3rd iteration. So we have been refunded, I guess is the word, for our 3rd cycle, each cycle being 5 years. So I believe that puts the start of CEDAR at 2013. We had 1.0 from 2013 to 2018, 2.0 from 2018 to 2023, and now we're in our 3rd iteration. So with that, we are currently partnering with 22 states. We are still bringing on states. So if your state is interested, come talk to us. We can give you some information. We provide technical assistance to collaborating teams of state departments of ed, institutes of higher ed, their teacher prep programs, and local education agencies to ensure effective teachers and leaders for each state. We do that through these 4 areas that you see at the bottom here, helping to reform educator and leader prep programs so that we can make sure that our future teachers and leaders are as prepared as possible to deliver high quality education to students. We help to revise licensure standards to align with reforms. We help to refine personal evaluation and data systems. So just the importance of using data to make decisions, especially if it comes to coming up to some solutions with teacher pipeline issues, things like that. We really help with data systems and how to use that data effectively. And then also realigning policy structures and professional learning systems. Our resources are available at cedar.org. If you want to check that website out, I'm going to go over some of our main universal resources with you. So while we do provide intensive technical assistance services to states, obviously Georgia being one of them, we do have a lot of universally available materials online for free that you may want to check out and utilize. So as I mentioned, CEDAR 3.0, our third iteration, these are our priorities and goals with the CEDAR Center and the work that we do. You'll see EPP, SEA, and LEA listed a lot here. We are really all about that collaboration. I think one of the great benefits of CEDAR and our state leadership team meetings is really making sure everyone is at the table. So we have Winna Lau, the State Director of Special Ed in Georgia. She is a very active participant. Her team, we have the SPDIG team, Melissa and Kennesaw State are one of our main EPPs that have been with us since the beginning, I think. Yes. And we're currently onboarding new EPPs as well. So we're really all about helping to facilitate and foster that collaboration. So we have 4 specific goal areas that our states focus on. So our first one is to increase educator preparation programs' capacity to offer high quality instruction for teacher and leader candidates. We want to help improve state education agency capacity to track and evaluate the impact of policy as it relates to attracting, preparing, and sustaining teachers and leaders. We want to help increase capacity to use multiple data sources to inform continuous improvement. I mentioned that before on the last slide, but we've really found having effective data systems at the state level has really kind of been a game changer in helping states know what specific challenges they might be facing and how to go about addressing them. We want to make sure that we really know what the problem is and what we need to work on before we start throwing solutions at it. And then we also want to increase capacity to sustain and scale up reform efforts in the state. So ideally, and so Meg Hammond and I, she's not here today, but she is the co-director of the CEDAR Center, and she is really involved with the Georgia team as well. We always say that if we left tomorrow, Georgia would be fine. The CEDAR team couldn't run itself. They basically do, because they have had they have systems in place that the work can continue without us. So they've really worked to build up those efforts. So a little bit about CEDAR Georgia specifically. They have been a partner with us since 2014. We have over 10 ed prep programs and RESAs, the Regional Education Service Agencies, that are with us. I believe we are currently onboarding universities. We might be up to 13 now, but there are obviously universities such as Kennesaw State that have been with us since the beginning, and we are currently onboarding new prep programs. They're regional service centers, which really help provide professional development and training to teachers. The Georgia Department of Education is a huge partner. And Melissa will talk about this a little bit more, how CEDAR and the state level folks have worked together to help leverage objectives and funding to improve initiatives across the state. The Professional Standards Commission is a partner, as policy is a big goal with CEDAR, and then the University System of Georgia as well. The graphic here is just an overview of 3 of the main focus areas. So our CEDAR Georgia team, when we meet, we have committees that have different focuses, or foci, I guess would be the word. Melissa leads our Inclusive Prep and Practice group. So that group focuses on implementing and integrating the high leverage practices for pre-service and in-service teacher and leader practice. We have a recruitment and retention of educators group, which is pretty self-explanatory. They are focusing on creating flexible entry points to recruit and retain a diverse and effective teacher workforce in Georgia. And then we have an alignment and scale up group. So this group helps to ensure that efforts across the state are aligned and that we're leveraging things amongst organizations within the state, and then also that we have the sustainability structures and practices in place to continue this work. So I want to show you a few general resources. And some of these I'll mention and probably say, oh, well, Melissa will talk a little bit more about it. She's going to talk a little bit more in depth about the specific MTSS work and resources that the Cedar, Georgia team has done in relation to the SPDIG. But in general, I wanted to highlight some of the universal free resources we have. We do have links for them. Let me see if I can put them in right now. I don't want to mess up my screen sharing, so I can put them in after after I'm done sharing slides, but each of these has a link if you have access to our PowerPoint. Our innovation configurations let me go to that slide. So innovation configurations help promote the implementation of evidence-based instructional practices in teacher prep activities. So they're designed to evaluate current teacher preparation and professional development by determining the extent to which evidence-based practices are taught, observed, and applied within teacher preparation and PD programs. At the end of each innovation configuration, there is a matrix that helps serve as a kind of assessment, self-reflective to see where you're at, to help guide teacher prep faculty and PD providers in the development and appropriate use of what the innovation configuration is talking about. So the example you see here is assessment practices within a multi-tiered system of support. I was reminded as I put the screenshot in for this, apparently I had a part in helping to write this. If you have any questions about these, I'm happy to answer them. But that was in partnership with the National Center on Intensive Intervention at AIR, which I also was a part of. Obviously, as their name specifies, they work on intensive intervention. So assessment practices within MTSS, and you'll see here a few more examples. We have a new one on inclusive principal leadership. We have culturally responsive teaching, evidence-based practices for students with disabilities, transition services, and a lot more. If you navigate to the landing page, you will see those. I'm going to note that not seeing other slides. You should be able to right now see a slide that says practice-based learning opportunities. Do you all see that?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So our next resource I just want to share is our practice-based learning opportunities. Mouse. So to help support teacher educators' use of the high leverage practices, the Cedar Center, in collaboration with Ed Prep program faculty, has collected a set of effective practice opportunities that we refer to as the practice-based learning opportunities, or PLOs. So we have PLOs around micro teaching, structured video analysis, performance feedback, lesson study, and we have the one that's featured here is mixed reality simulation for high leverage practices. Melissa is one of the main drivers of this work, no pun intended, I just thought of that. But she and her colleague who was formerly at Kennesaw State, Dr. Kate Zimmer, have done so much work with using the Avatar simulation lab in helping new teachers and teachers in their Ed Prep program practice the high leverage practices. So you'll find some information on that. That's not the focus of today's presentation, but if you have more questions or want to learn more about that, I will put her on the spot and say I'm sure she'll be happy to answer those questions for you at some point. But really encourage you to check that out. The mixed reality simulation is really cool. There are live actors behind the simulation, and you can specify, well, you give them a lesson plan in advance so they know what the teacher is planning to teach for their session, and you can specify like the level of behaviors you want them to exhibit, things like that. So it's really cool and personalized. And then I believe this is the last resource I'm going to show you, our course enhancement modules. These are usable resources for faculty and PD providers to include in effective opportunities for teachers and leaders to learn about and use evidence-based practices. So you can use each SEM, as we call them, in whole or in part to support teacher and leader learning at the pre-service and in-service levels. So we have MTSS for mathematics, classroom and behavior management, literacy, evidence-based reading instruction, and more. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those universal resources. I can put the links in the chat before you all leave today. But for the purpose of this presentation, talking about how CEDAR in general has helped to support the work of the MTSS SPDIG, I am going to turn it over to Melissa to talk to you more about those specifics.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm just going to give a couple of specific examples of what some of this collaboration and work has looked like in Georgia. And then please feel free to drop questions in the chat or ask at any time. We want this to be as informative as possible. So Amy, if we go to the next slide. So as Karen mentioned earlier, we have been working in our state really since like 2017, 2018 on really integrating both MTSS and high leverage practices across the state. And ever since like the initial kind of launch of that, we've tried to really pair those as much as possible for all of our educators, both pre-induction and our veteran educators across the state. So that's kind of the framing with which a lot of the examples you'll see, they really try and connect high leverage practices with MTSS. So two of the examples that I'm going to share, one is about some MTSS case studies that we are working on to be used in pre-service teacher coursework, as well as a current mini grant opportunity that we have out for our EPPs to apply for that is both supported by CEDAR and the Department of Education to be able to implement MTSS in our teacher ed coursework so that our teachers come out ready to enter that induction phase with our districts. And as Amy mentioned, Kennesaw State is just one of that 10 to 13 range of EPPs across the state. So for all of these pieces that I'll show you, this has been a wonderful collaboration with many stakeholders across our state. So we go to the next slide, and we can put some of those links in the chats too with our HLP work. So what led us up to the case study and the mini grant opportunity has been kind of an ongoing effort over the last couple of years to take some of the national CEDAR resources that Amy just shared and help make them even more Georgia specific, because they're fantastic, they're incredible resources. But then we saw that at CEDAR, we had this opportunity to kind of connect the dot between the specific things happening in our state and our specific needs, you know, the terms, what we're using, and then all of these fantastic resources. So we created an innovation configuration similar to the ones that Amy showed earlier that was specific to MTSS in Georgia. And so this is something that then our faculty can use and take a look in their coursework to see, okay, am I hitting all of these different indicators? And maybe they're not, but then it can show, well, then where else across the program are we hitting this? How are we hitting these indicators across the whole spread of our teacher ed program? Because we know with how complex MTSS is, it's not just like a 1 week module, one time in your coursework in your prep program, and then you just know how to be a part of an MTSS team. So how are we really spreading this out and scaffolding it across the entire piece, including when they get to student teaching and their year-long clinical experience, so that they really are at a place where they're coming out developmentally ready to not just have like a little bit of understanding, but to start participating as a part of the MTSS team. And this is just a screenshot of just kind of what that looks like. And then you can go ahead, Amy. So I mentioned our mini grants, and this has been a new initiative this year that we're really excited about. And so this came out of what Karen was speaking about earlier with that 4-8 focus. So our state is currently, as I'm sure many of your states are, deep in the implementation and planning phase for really making sure that we have strong science of reading in our teacher ed programs and in our schools. And so the House bill really covered those grades K-3. And a lot of our teacher prep standards kind of cover everything now. So it's not just K-3, it's really all of our teacher preparation programs to differing degrees of how well are we preparing our teachers to understand what the foundations of literacy are and scientific methods of teaching. So with this opportunity, we worked with Karen in the Department of Ed to say, well, could we provide some opportunities for our faculty to get creative and tell us what they need to be able to prepare their teachers well, but not necessarily for the K-3 areas where there's already a lot of effort and initiative and work happening. But for those 4-8 grades that we know also need high quality scientific reading instruction, and we know that's a critical time within the Georgia MTSS framework as well. And so for this first year, CEDAR is providing some pilot funds for us to provide these mini grants. And it was up to, I think it was 15,000 across, with up to being able to take up to 5 different grant projects. And then working with the state to say, is this something we could continue on going? Is this something that we could keep building off of? Amy mentioned about sustainability and how important that is. So part of the expectation for anyone who receives this grant is to come and present to the CEDAR team and to create some kind of a deliverable that either says, if they're making a PD module, great, share the module, please. Let that be something that then anyone can use. If you're ordering Wilson readers, or you're ordering some kind of a material so they can practice screening, or they can practice implementing an intervention, can you kind of give us some feedback on, was that helpful? How many people were able to do that? Were they able to use it in the field? What's the best way to implement that? So then if someone else comes behind and says, well, I think my department should order some materials, we have some level of guidance and reflections from people who have used this to help learn how to scale this up and do this in a sustainable way. So this is just an example of what our flyer looked like. And then also the application was super reasonable and brief, but still gave us really good information. And our team of EPPs across the state, all CEDAR members, met this morning to rate the applications. And we were just really excited with the different things that we saw coming through, and the creativity from in-service professional development to making coursework assignments in their teacher prep to actually thinking about, here are some tangible materials we need for our people to practice on. So we're excited about what this first step will lead as we move forward. And then the last one I wanted to really touch on is our case studies. And this actually hits back to that mixed reality simulation that Amy was showing, practice-based learning opportunities. So again, you saw the national resource that we've worked with CEDAR to help make just available for everyone. Well, so similarly, we then wanted to say, so how can we make this even more Georgia specific? And so working with Karen, and we've looked at both Go IEP, which is our IEP framework, and then Go MTSS, which is this fantastic platform that can be used across the state. And so what a great then opportunity for our pre-service teachers to practice on a statewide platform that can be used across the state once they're an in-service teacher and in their induction piece. So over the last 2 years, we've been working together with the Department of Education to learn the platform. They created like a nice little sandbox area even for us to play in and be able to do some case studies for pre-service teachers who aren't formally hired by a district yet. And then working to create some case study materials that could be taken and put into either coursework or like a professional learning community for induction teachers, where we have a fictional student, we have fictional student data, we have fictional graphs that align to the data that are all in the Go MTSS platform, communication notes. And so they can work through this case study in stages to think about, what would documenting notes after a data meeting look like? What would adding in this next round of progress monitoring data, enter it in, see what happens to the graph? How does that determine what kind of intervention you should choose? And then we have the opportunity then for them to then actually use the mixed reality simulation to practice then delivering the intervention to the student. And so we've gotten some feedback from a couple of different stakeholders on just the draft form right now. We've done some small pilots without the mixed reality of just the case study written materials and courses. And then we're looking forward to piloting with the mixed reality simulation and some courses this coming spring. So we're excited to see the evolution of this and working to kind of perfect this recipe on this initial one too, to then think about building this out to the secondary level too. And, you know, I believe the first one we did was around literacy, because it has been such a big piece in our state too, but we also want to have like a mathematics one, et cetera. So some social, emotional, behavioral pieces. So there's so many cool opportunities once you get the frame of it well done, then to be able to kind of play around with what the scenario actually is. The last piece I'll touch on that also connects to MTSS is we're helping both CEDAR and the Department of Ed. We're working together with some CEDAR funds and the Department of Education communications group to help really just keep spreading the word around high leverage practices and the connection with MTSS. So we have a subgroup of our prep and practice committee who are designing this really nice campaign with like cool social media pieces, great visuals, some high quality stuff that just one EPP alone would not be able to do or justify spending the time or resources to do. But by working with the Department of Ed and utilizing our CEDAR space to collaborate, we're going to be able to keep kind of saying like, so what is this high leverage practice? What does it mean? What does it look like in action? And how does this connect to the larger MTSS framework that you're deeply invested in? So that was more than 3 examples, but they're all really exciting. And so we're excited to share those. So I wanted to pause for a minute to kind of just hear, also any immediate questions that come from any of those examples. But then I have a QR code here for a Padlet, and I think we can drop that. I can drop the link in the chat as well too. But we just kind of wanted to hear, after you've heard some of the things that George is doing, what are some of the things in your states that either kind of resonate with that align, that are really great ideas that Georgia should think about? And so we started the first question with MTSS, since that's where our goals really focus on and what we're focused on. But we also know that so many of these pieces intersect across a lot of different aspects. And so we also have the space too for you to just say like, yes, this is another great example of how I'm working with my state agency and my EPPs to really create change that can move the needle more so than just one group. So let me know, please, in the chat if the link does not work for you, but it should work. And then, or if you need the QR code as well. And I think, Amy, you put it in the chat, right? Awesome. Thank you. All right. So give you guys a minute to just kind of brainstorm out some ideas. And then I'm going to pass it back over to Karen. I like seeing all the little bubbles pop in. And you can feel free to unmute at any point too, if you just like to verbally share it as well. Oh, I love the high impact tutoring, train the EPPs, IEP quality training modules, statewide initiatives. Yeah, the common messaging pieces where there's that common language, common messaging, that has been something that is so incredibly important. Great, the SPIDIG team on their CEDAR team. Yes, Mississippi, that's awesome. These are great. Yes, we are actually funding. So who's the we in the actively funding letters in that comment? I would actually be curious about that. Our institution is actually funding some letters training for some faculty, but I'd be curious who the we is on the letters training in AIM PD.
Well, that was my note. Mary in Rhode Island.
Oh, Rhode Island. Awesome. Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you.
That's amazing to be able to offer that resource for the EPPs.
Well, we're doing, many on this call may know that we're doing this. So not only are we funding, for example, professional development for faculty members to engage in letters, whether it's the 1-year EC or 2-year K-5 version, we're also funding teacher candidates. And so the idea is that they're learning it together and then placing them in schools with teachers who've already gone through letters. It was far from perfect, but that's what we're trying to do. Thank you.
That's so great, because that's been a question that we have, our EPP is just funding that for our faculty, and not everyone, but just a small group who wants to start right away. And that's already kind of been the question, is we've gotten like, can you do this for teacher candidates? Can you do this? Are we going to do this for every new faculty member who comes? What's the sustainability and the scale? And so that's really neat to see that as a state, you're thinking about that. Because then there's other EPPs that are like, well, we can't do that. Like, we can't fund it for even five faculty members. We don't have the budget for that right now. And so it's been a really helpful training. I've started it. And I love the idea of the faculty and the candidates and their then district mentor teachers kind of all being on the same, it speaks to the common messaging and the common language. They have a common piece that when they say, you know, this is what I mean with this phonological awareness piece, they're speaking similar piece to it. These are fantastic. Yes, and I like the allowable funding uses comments too. That's such an important point too, of just even helping understand what are the different allowable funding, how people are using the money is super helpful just to know and get ideas from when you hear what other people are doing. And then PBIS and social emotional learning, that's fantastic. And UDL with the academic side, that's great. All right, thank you. And if you keep thinking of anything else, please feel free to just put it down in the Padlet. I'll keep this one active, so it'll just be available if ever you kind of want to go back and see what people were saying. But it's so refreshing and interesting to hear what other states are doing too, as we're all kind of working towards similar goals that just may look a little different in each place. So Karen, with that, I'll turn it back to you as Amy pulls back up the PowerPoint.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. And I'll tell you, it just is amazing when you bring all of these pieces together that are happening in Georgia, and it really makes my heart swell. I'm so happy to see everybody working together and the important work that we're doing. You know, it's going on all along, but to see it all presented in one place is really nice. So one of the things that we need to kind of bring it home with is the lessons learned. So if you will, advance the slide. The first bullet is about collaboration and how we have to equip our pre-service and veteran teachers with the knowledge and skills. And this is something I mentioned earlier, but it is important that we lay that foundation for them. And then secondly, if the work that we are doing is important, and we know it is, then we have to work towards sustainable practices. And that work does not begin at the end of a SPDIG grant. It begins at the beginning so that you can focus on what do we need to do to ensure sustainability. And you keep that at the forefront all the time. And then we want to make sure that the work that we're doing, whether it's the collaborative work or the work within the DOE that's collaborative, that we aren't creating competing initiatives and that we are working together. So often I've heard, you know, comments like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Well, we want to make sure that that's not the case and that everybody is working together and that we eliminate some of the myths about MTSS that are out there. And we know if we want greater results, then that certainly comes through the collaboration. And in this case, leveraging our funds so that we can continue what we're doing. So I thank you so much. And I know my colleagues do as well. And we will entertain any questions you might have, and you can put them in the chat. But I know we have another group that's presenting as well. So thank you so much.
Karen, Amy, and Melissa, thank you for kind of giving us an example of collaboration between CEDAR and the Georgia SPDIG. It's super helpful and interesting, Karen, to me to see that the lessons learned kind of circle back to some of those notes and what people put in the chat about collaborative work groups, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. Sharing, making sure that people have voice and those sorts of things. So thank you for that. If anybody's got questions, we've got a few minutes here, a couple minutes that you could unmute and ask them verbally, or I'm certain if you put them in the chat, Karen, Melissa, and Amy would continue to monitor that and answer during our next presentation.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Please.
My name's Sarah. I work at OSEP and work with SPDIGs in various states, as well as with the Personnel Development Program, which funds CEDAR, right? So we're interested in ensuring that CEDAR states are working with all of those, any projects in the state that have PDP funding. So, for example, we give funds to the University of Georgia, and they use the funds to provide scholarships to prepare, right, OSEP scholars. We want those OSEP scholars to be involved in whatever work CEDAR's doing in the state. We want them to have experience working with the State Department of Education, helping with whatever research, professional development they're involved in. And we absolutely want them learning the same evidence-based practices, high leverage practices that are, that the state is investing in through the SPDIG project. So I was wondering if you have had an opportunity to connect with those grantees, and if not, I would love to be able to share with you the names of the faculty that have those grants and the programs so that you can find them and connect with them and engage them. And the same is true for Michigan and Kansas and like every other state here. So we have PDP grants in 48 states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. And we want them to be learning the evidence-based practices that you all are teaching through professional development. And so I thought I would ask the question today, and happy to connect anybody here with your funded grants. Do you know who they are? Have you had a chance to connect? Are any of you OSEP scholars yourselves?
Not an OSEP scholar, but I love the OSEP scholar program. I think it's fantastic.
Okay.
And so I think that's great. I think that we've had maybe, I don't know if we've done it in as formal as a way as we could in terms of making sure that they're at the table. I think there's been some interaction depending on the EPP, what they're involved in. But so yes, the answer is yes. I would love the names, the list of the programs for our Georgia. And I'm sure other states would potentially as well too, because that would be such a great way to make that connection even more intentional than just if, the faculty they're with is involved or the project they're working on. So yeah, that would be fantastic.
Okay, fabulous. I think Karen, you might have been the one who said, like, sometimes people say like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And I think, universities are big places, states are big and spread out. And so people don't necessarily know like, oh, you're working on that, I'm working on that. So together we can, elevate each other's work. That's my goal in doing it. Okay, so I'll reach out separately and share it, but the invitation is available to anyone. And so I would love we can come back at another meeting and talk about how to figure out who has that funding and to be sure they're teaching what the things that you really care about with your SPDIG as well.
That would be fantastic.
Thank you. Great presentation. Really interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for following up with that question and a little bit of dialogue there. Again, I encourage people to continue to use the chat to ask questions. If you've got questions, Melissa and Amy and Karen, I'm certain will be monitoring and be excited to follow up in the chat or even email if I'm sure I'm not oversharing with that. So at any rate, thank you all for that. Next, we're excited. We've got Stephanie Woodley, Laura Barwagen, and Sherry Bochnik. I'm certain I've butchered at least one of those names, from Illinois to talk with us about advisory board efforts and sharing two examples of advisory board agendas and data that's been shared through the advisory board. So with that, I'll go ahead and let you all introduce and jump into it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Woodley. I am the grant coordinator for the IESC network. I don't know if we're supposed to do the ORHs or bucket list. I'm going to choose bucket list just because it is much faster so we can move forward. Our bucket list is to travel, but we want to go overseas, but right now we're focusing on the United States area. We're big campers. We have a little teardrop camper, my husband and I do, and we're trying to visit all the national parks right now. So we're about a third of the way in, and we're hoping to visit 3 more over the spring break time. So that's mine.
I'm Sherry Bohanec. I am the project director, and I am from the Illinois State Board of Education. I will also do bucket list. My husband and I desperately want to go back to Hawaii. We went there a few years ago and had probably the best vacation we've ever had. So that's definitely my bucket list to get back there someday.
Great. My bucket list is to kind of rent a condo in Florence, Italy. We've been there a couple times and I'd love to just spend a semester there. I am the project evaluator for the Illinois SPDIG. Stephanie, take it away.
All right. Jennifer asked us to kind of talk about our advisory council. We're in year 4 right now of our grant, and this is the first cycle of this grant. I am starting my 2nd year. Laura is new to the SPDIG process, and Sherry just started September 1st. So we have really been trying to figure out as a grant how to involve our advisory council. And I just have to give a shout out to Megan, who is our director of our Parent Training Information Center that we partner with, that I noticed is on our meeting today, who's not been on our meeting before. And she is part of our advisory council. So Jennifer just asked for us to just share, and we would love your feedback as well as we're moving forward in this grant and also thinking about our next cycle, but how to really communicate with our stakeholders and how to involve them in our processes as well, because some of you have been doing this a lot longer than we have, and I'm sure have some things to share with other grants as well. So here are just our talking points for today. Just want to give you an idea of who our advisory council members are, a quick sample agenda that is similar. And we just had an advisory council meeting today. We've been very meetinged today. Laura is going to provide a data reporting example that she might go through with our advisory council. Then we're just going to do some lessons learned. I liked that the CEDAR group before ended with lessons learned, and that's really how we're ending too, are some lessons learned in our couple of years of doing this. And so we like to start with essential questions for our
Stephanie,
advisory council. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to point out that the slides aren't advancing from our perspective.
Are you on the talking? Can you see the talking points?
No.
No, we're looking at the first slide, which is your title slide.
Okay, well.
So it might be not showing.
I'm going to go, I'm just probably sharing the incorrect screen. Laura, what did you do to me? I'm just giving you a hard time. That's usually Laura. Can you see now? I'm sharing the wrong screen. So now I'm going to lag a little bit. So I apologize because of my second screen. So we like to share and start with essential questions in our advisory council and even in any of our groups, just to get people thinking of questions that we might ask later on in the meeting. And so I kind of threw them out there already, but just to think about for right now, what are effective ways to communicate with stakeholders and how do you involve them within your work? So not answering them yet, we're just kind of think about them for right now. And sometimes we do this through our when we go over our goals at the beginning of the year. It's just very dependent on what we're doing. So this is a really long list, and we're very fortunate to have a great advisory council with many different representatives. And at our meeting today, it really helped to drive the conversation, having so many different individuals on our advisory council, because we were asking questions about mentoring topics, and we got it from the state perspective. We got it from our parent organization, from one of our members who works with early childhood. We really do school aged more. So and from our principals that are on it, our special ed cooperative directors. So we're really getting to hear all of these different perspectives on how we can better provide. We're getting ready to provide on-demand mentoring videos on our website. And so we really were able to get a lot of different perspectives. So again, because we are statewide and we cover such a large scope, our scope of our advisory councils is also rather large, but we are very fortunate to have these people serve on our advisory council. This is just a sample council agenda. Of course, anybody can use the chat at any time, but some of our members really like to use our Padlet that we always have. We always have like a parking lot Padlet that we look at throughout the time. Actually, today, no one used that. It's the first time that no one has used it, but we always put a QR code on the first slide. on the agenda slide and then put a link in the chat, and it does typically get used. We do our welcome introduction pieces. At our last meeting, we did review our objectives of our overall project. Because where we are in our grant, we're really trying to start thinking about more sustainability pieces. I really liked the quote from the last one. You have to start thinking about sustainability from the beginning. But now as we're thinking where we are in the grant, we're even thinking about it even harder. And then also just questions, as essential questions. What support might they need? District level, early career level. I always provide a statewide report, how many districts we are working with, how many teachers we're currently coaching, we're mentoring, how many different professional developments, trainings have we provided since the last time we met, how many participants have we reached? We also break it down, and many times they will ask us. We try to really open it up to them too, what type of data. So in our first advisory council meeting, they specifically asked how many of these participants are early career educators. So Laura was able to very quickly look at data from our surveys, from our post-PD surveys. We know that not everybody fills out those post-PD surveys. So this time around, reported back out what Laura had said. And then I had pulled some data from our sign-in sheets as well. And then we also, as a grant, offer a free monthly webinar type event once a month. And that is, we do have a high concentration of early career educators that come to that. So our grant assistant pulled out that data. So they could see how many of our participants that are coming to that are early career educators. And it went from about 30% of participants over all of our trainings, and in our PDCs, it was up. In one of our PDCs, the very first one, it was 65% were early career educators. So that was really important for our advisory council members to see that. Dr. Barwigan always gives a report, and Laura's going to kind of share some of the data that she might share out. Last month, we were kind of rolling out our coaching system, and so we always provide them some type of things that we're developing. The status of something this month had to do with mentoring topics, and that was part of our feedback loop that started happening at our last meeting. Of here's what we talked about in our advisory council. We took it to all of our area teams, got feedback of what they're seeing. Here it is compiled. Now let's talk about it more. So we really try to put it into and involve them within that feedback loop and provide them specific information on how we're using the information that they're providing us during our advisory council meetings, that it's not just going to waste. We're actually following up. We're following through with what they're saying. And then again, always time for questions, feedback, answers to specific things in the meetings as well.
Okay. And so I'm very aware of time and that we're pressed for time. So I will just rush through these, and then if you have any questions, I'm just available to be contacted for these. But mainly the data that we share with our advisory council, from my perspective, I share two things. One, data that provides evidence of how we're addressing our stated goals. So what are the goals of the grant? And generally, Stephanie at the beginning of the advisory council meeting just shares what are the goals of the IESE network. And so then the data that I share demonstrates how are we addressing those goals. And then the second data point that I share is that I want the data to begin conversations about help that we need from the experts on our advisory council. So I might share data that isn't pretty, but that we need help. So next slide, Stephanie. So as we look at the data that we share, maybe we'll advance the slides.
There you go.
Data that provides evidence of how we're addressing the stated goals. So in the last month's advisory committee meeting, next slide, I shared responses from our post-PD survey responses from March to September 2023. And next slide. And so one of the tables that I shared with them is this one that just demonstrated what were those responses. There was an N of 874 respondents. And then I highlighted the second from the right column, which is where we were in May. That was the column that had the greatest percentages of respondents, that to some extent we were doing these things. And then in September, when I shared it with the advisory council, we now are at the farthest right. And that came from reviewing this data with our IESE network team and encouraging them and telling them, I think we can do better at hitting these targets more strongly. And so I wanted to share that with our advisory council, that we're growing in the perception of the high quality professional development that we're providing. Next slide. Then also what I tried to do is tie it into some of our goals. As Stephanie has said, early career educators is a focus of our grant. And so I gave just analyses that I had conducted that demonstrate that early career educators perceive that this PD increased their ability to apply knowledge to their professional practice, increase their ability to reflect upon and evaluate and adjust their own professional practice, and increase their likelihood of remaining in education to a greater extent than those teaching longer. So I wanted just to demonstrate that focus of our grant was demonstrated in the data that we're collecting. Next slide. Also, here's another kind of a point of comparison that had to do with special educators have higher perceptions than general educators. Again, special educators are our area of focus. How do their responses compare to the general educators who are part of some of the professional developments that we offer? Then next slide. We also have questions about what their perceptions were before they came into the professional development and after. And I want to share with them that, you know, there is a significant growth in both knowledge and perception of implementation, of their intent to implement it after the professional development. Again, to show the effect of the PD upon content knowledge, implementation. Next slide. I know I'm just whizzing through this, and that's fine, because the point of this is really just to kind of see what kinds of data do we share. And then I give a summary with a concluding statement. The population we are affecting are early career special educators who are exactly the persons our grant states we intend to affect. So I want to just bring home that point for our advisory council. But then also, next slide, the question always is, well, yeah, big deal. So what? People like the PD you offer. So I also like to tie it into the data that we're getting from the effects that we have upon, and the sample I gave here is teacher retention. So if you could go to the next slide, we have a question on our surveys that asks about, does it increase the likelihood of your remaining in education? So we have perception data here. But then take a look at the next slide. So then this is data that we had gotten from our Illinois State Board of Education Data and Strategies team. And what it does is it demonstrates the differences in the state average of retention of teachers compared to those who participate with the IESE network. And in every indicator, retained in school, retained in district, and retained in state, that if you were part of our program, that then you had higher retention rates than the remainder of the state. So I want to bring all of that together. Next slide, please. And so I won't even go into this conclusion from the retention data sets. And then we also have, if you could just continue a couple slides. We're just, I know, really pressed for time. I also just want to, I also try to tie it to student success. Here's the survey question that we have. And then Stephanie, just go through the next two slides. And then I demonstrate, you know, our target was that we would have, if you're participating with the IESE network, that you had an increase in scores for your students with IEPs to a greater extent over the years. So here's one data point, and then the next one, Stephanie, is mathematics. And so we reached our targets on those. And so I want to demonstrate to them the whole cycle of how it all holds together. I like that. But then also data we need to have that that begins conversations. So if you could skip down like 3 slides, keep going. And then here we have data that was really bad. So yeah, we just scroll past that. But could you back up one?
Yes.
Because this is just important, is that we tell them good news about how it is we're succeeding in meeting those targets. Boy, this looks terrible, doesn't it? It is terrible. And so last year, when looking at our goal, our performance measure was that we would reduce the suspensions in over half of the schools with whom we worked. Goodness gracious, 7.7% is nowhere near half. And so I share this ugly data with them and say, help. These are data that we have, and we really need your help. And how can we move this needle? And so it was a great conversation of all different perspectives from all the different kinds of members that we have on our advisory council. And so then we just opened it up for questions. Stephanie, back to you.
And by the way, we know that there was still a lot of COVID happening in 2021, and that had a discussion too. However, that student behaviors has been one of the biggest ones that has come up over and over again. Don't know if you all are experiencing the same things in your state, but that has been from our parent organization, from ISB calls to school districts. That student behavior has been a big piece that we've been hearing a lot about. And I know that it is time here, but if you can, just anything that you have learned, either share, if there is time to do that, stick it in the chat. I do want to say that we have tried Jamboards and breakout rooms for our advisory council, and they have not worked. We just not had great participation in Jamboards and breakout rooms in our advisory council meetings. They're from 11 to 12:30. They're an hour and a half long, so there is time for it. But I think sometimes just processing information and taking the time to answer some of the questions or the expectations during those times was a lot. And what we found are having very specific questions, leading them through that feedback loop of what they are suggesting, how we're using it. It has really driven our conversations. And today we just had such a fantastic conversation from all of our advisory council members to help inform us moving forward in our next steps. And it just kind of one person could hear from another person, could hear from another person. And that has honestly been the best piece, has been that how are we using the information that they are providing? And then also, how can we move forward best in the things that they're seeing, and some very specific questions. So I would say that those have been the best ways that we've involved our members the most. We convene as an advisory group once a quarter. So 4 times in a school year. You're welcome. And thank you for feedback that I've seen come through this is my first time ever doing this, and I had no idea what I was doing when we started this, and how to involve members and all of those pieces. So thank you for the validation in the chat as well.
Well, Stephanie, Laura, and Sherry, thank you for sharing this. You know, kind of throughout the whole webinar today, I was reflecting on, you know, different ways of breaking down silos, you know, and it's interesting for me to see these advisory board meetings doing just that. Right? You're pulling people from such disparate backgrounds and professional roles that, you know, you're really breaking down silos. And kind of a side note, it's incredibly fun and satisfying to watch silos fall on YouTube. So if nobody's done that yet, go ahead and do that. At any rate, thank you all for your time. If you've got questions about any of this, please follow up. I do want to note that this has been recorded. So even though Laura was kind of flipping through, having to go through that data real quick, the recording can be accessed online, and you can pause and look at the data and reflect on what Laura was sharing as she was running through that. So thank you all again for your attendance. Thank you for your presentation. I think it's also important to, even though Jennifer's not here, to go ahead and recognize Jennifer and her role in organizing these monthly webinars as well. So thank you, and I wish you all a great afternoon and weekend. Bye.